Have you ever wondered since the end of chapter 3 why every encounter with the Roaring Knight is just super cool and menacing? I'm telling you, this is not an accident. The fact that the Roaring Knight is so obsessed with how we see them and how they try so hard to look cool is actually affecting how the prophecy and the whole story of Deltarune is playing out. Today we are analyzing the actions of the Knight and how they are trying so hard to keep aura farming with us. Of course, major spoilers ahead, so I recommend playing chapters 3 and 4 before watching. Okay, so before we dive into the actions of the Knight, I wanna go back to the first 2 chapters of Deltarune, where the Knight is not yet present. In chapter 1, the Knight is barely mentioned during the game, but their name is spoken during some crucial part of the dialogue for the Deltarune lore. The first time we hear about the Knight is from Shom, who tells us that a strange knight appeared recently, and 3 of the 4 kings of Card Castle were locked away. This is the first time we hear about the Knight, and they are already aura farming before we even learn who they are. As we meet the final boss of chapter 1, Chaos King, he tells us even more about the lore of the Knight. Apparently they are the ones pulling the dark fountains from the earth, fountains creating new worlds filled with chaos. King was obviously collaborating with the Knight, as he states he doesn't want to fail them. And get this, he never even met the Knight, as in chapter 4 wonders how they look. This means that the Knight was very cautious to be seen even by their own allies. During chapter 2, the Knight is never mentioned until the end, before the final boss battle, when Queen tells Noelle what the Roaring Knight did, which was creating the cyber world with their blade into the ground. Wanting to dominate the world, Queen's plan was to create more dark fountains and expand darkness, which is exactly what the plan of the Knight is. But from this dialogue, it seems like Queen didn't see the Knight either, which means that they still were not willing to show themselves, even in the second chapter. So from these very brief dialogues, it seems like the Knight has kept a consistent plan, creating more darkness with more fountains, while being casted in the shadows, for no one to see them. But something changed in the following chapter. Chapter 3 is the turning point for the Knight. While 99% of the chapter plays out normally with Tenna, right as you're about to close the fountain, out of nowhere the Roaring Knight slashes Tenna's arms, and while Susie confronts them, they stand facing the other direction with arms crossed. And before turning to our team, a shiny light is emitted from their head. But I'm not entirely sure what exactly was shining. But regardless, this is a clear sign of what we already called aura farming, going as far as doing these pretty much useless cutscenes that don't really help them achieve their goal, just to try and look tough in our eyes. I know it sounds stupid, but there's more. They then proceed to barely try to take Toriel before Susie stops them. And at that point it's pure aura, from taking on a metamorphic form just to move a few meters away, to pure screaming out of their lungs before revealing their blade. At this point I believe they couldn't make more aura maxing. I mean, this is as far as it can get. There's no possible way they could farm more aura after hitting all these moves. But then the real battle begins, and oh boy, if you thought that was aura maxing, just look at the poses they do while fighting. They are clearly trying to prove how cool they look while using their swoon attack. You might also know that Chris is working with the Knight for some reason, so they're probably holding back too, and to compensate they are just aura maxing all over the battle screen. If you manage to quote unquote defeat the Knight, they will be knighting Chris too, with the sword, which is also a huge aura farming tactic. Then Officer Undyne comes and the Knight once again metamorphs into a cool ass beard, which is basically certain to be a product of the absolute aura farming that was happening. Then in chapter 4 we meet the Roaring Knight almost immediately upon entering the dark world at the church. And of course they immediately start aura farming by positioning themselves at the end of the hallway that Susie and Chris need to cross to close the fountain. Susie gets immediately knocked out while Chris has the chance to reach them as they get sworded. If you manage to make Chris reach the Knight, they will refuse to attack them. The Knight is extremely exposed here, not even a meter away from Chris, but they still decide to aura farm instead of being in an advantage position. The second encounter with the Knight is in the Dark Sanctuary, and as you can see, he's still standing tall while looking the opposite direction to aura max. Once you pass through their swords, there's another cutscene of pure aura maxing with Susie. At this point I don't think Toby Fox is even trying to hide it anymore. In the third sanctuary, the squad gets destroyed by the swords and left with 1 HP. The Knight is clearly just playing without actually killing them, which is a huge sign of, you guessed it, aura farming. By the end of the game we see for the last time the Knight, and as always they are standing with their iconic pose before hitting the moves after Susie tries to hit them. This is clearly not a strategic move by the Knight's part. They then proceed to laugh at Susie's allegations before hitting a disappointed expression and creating another dark fountain that generates none other than the Titan itself. While this can be considered a strategic move, the Knight still doesn't and lose the opportunity to do some mogging on the team, to look even cooler. So now we have looked at every time the Roaring Knight has blatantly aura farmed with Chris and Susie and Ralsei. Knowing Toby Fox, this is not by accident. So why would he make the Knight aura farm so much? So if the Knight is the actual Dark World form of someone, this means their personality is also part of the Knight's identity. The act of aura farming is more common into younger people, of course. You wouldn't expect an adult to start aura farming like that, especially in a game like Deltarune, where there are no adult characters that are aura farming all the time. So what this means to us is that to identify the Knight's identity, we can scrap all the adult characters and focus on the teenagers. This can be shipped well with Des is the Knight theory, since Des is not a grown adult yet. We don't know much about their personality, but by the few clues we have, it's possible that Des is actually aura farming in front of us all the time, given she's the Knight, of course. But even if she wasn't, it's still a huge clue to who could be the Knight. This is also something we already saw in Undertale in some way, so massive Undertale spoilers ahead, click off with the video if you didn't play it. So, in the true pacifist of Undertale, we have the final boss with Asriel Dreamer, where he uses weapons with childish names like Chaos Sabers, the Chaos Buster, and the Hyper Gunner, which don't sound all that serious, especially in a situation like that where space and time are on the line. Not to mention, Asriel calls himself the god of Hyper Death. Like, what kind of name is that even? Of course, even if Asriel turned himself into a god, at the end he's still a child, around the age of 10. So of course his names won't be serious. But it is also a pattern we see with the Roaring Knight. The fact that they are trying so hard to look cool in front of us is not the kind of behavior you would expect from a serial killer. With all that being said, we have now acquired a deeper understanding in how the Knight is playing its cards. At the end of the day, they are not actually this mysterious figure that everyone expected them to be. As all Toby Fox characters, the backstory of the Knight is probably not an happy one, and we still don't know what they have gone through to make them believe that spreading darkness and looking scary is the right thing to do. Of course, we can only speculate on the origin story and identity of the Knight, but for now, I wanna thank you for watching, and I hope this gave you a major insight in what the Knight could be up to right now in the story of Deltarune.